right, so we've had this narrative going for a while that, well, actually, we've got a lot of narratives going on right now that are completely off base. Some of them are true in many cases, but not specific cases that we're having shoved in our face. For example, the situation with Zaid Atkinson. We were told that this was racially motivated. Meanwhile, there is literally zero evidence of racial profiling. There is a lot of evidence of homeless profiling. They were wrong, but a lot of people want to ignore it because it doesn't fit their bias. So I'm going to post something up here, first of all, something that I spoke out about years ago. Now, this one right here, it premiered on in May of 2020, but this isn't the first time that something like this is happening. Mr. Gab Penton typed, "What up, King?" I'm not a king, I'm just a Sean. We don't have any royalty in this country. If there is royalty in this country, they should go back to their own country. If they're here for peace talks, that is acceptable. Your daughter's not a princess, your son isn't a prince, you are not a king, and she's not a queen. However, I'm sure you didn't mean it as an insult, so there is that. Now, this right here, the one that I just posted a link to, it's called "White Women Form Barrier to Protect Black Protesters from Police." It's white people's fault, white people's fault, white people's fault. I hear that so much. Everything is white people's fault. If a white person get busted and a black person get busted for the same thing, the black person gets to sell the narrative that they were racially profiled, but the white person wasn't. Could it be that, well, it's not racial profiling? Could it be that in many of these cases it's profiling of the poor? One thing that people keep typing at me as I try to get help getting my voice actually heard by the courts, actually heard by the media after the slandering they gave me. Man, I tell you what, I've had to deal with every kind of bias there is. A lot of people hate me because I'm white. Now, I want to start off by actually saying thank you to all of these women who formed a protective barrier to protect black people from the police. If only we had someone do that for the disabled, because they're over twice as likely to be killed by police. If only we had people to do this for the homeless. They're over 250 times more likely to be killed by police. 250 times more likely to be killed by police. That's a lot. Now we keep getting this narrative sold that white people did it, white people did it, white people did it. Well, these women are white and they're standing right in front. They're saying loud and proud, "We will not let this stand. We will not let this happen." When I post stuff about women, oftentimes it's after being bombarded by man posts. Matter of fact, I'm going to read one to you that, well, is quite offensive. It is quite sexist. But it's also one of those where if I was to change the word man over to the word woman, it would just be a joke. Whereas many of them, if I was to change the word man over to woman, it would not be considered a joke. It would get my stuff taken off the internet. The reason for that is because rampant sexism is so prevalent in the United States that even the coding on YouTube and Facebook allows for female to be sexist towards men, but it doesn't allow men to say exactly the same thing, just changing that one word. So when I make a post about women, most generally, It's in response to those sexist anti-male posts. We honestly do need to thank these women because they're not just fighting for black rights in this case, they're fighting for all of our rights by making their voices heard, by making an actual stand. They're literally standing arm in arm, letting people know that it's not going to happen on their watch. Now let's go to Facebook. This is one the top post put up. I saw it by just one person today, but how do I get to my Facebook? Ah, screw it. I can do it on the internet here just by typing the letter F. One thing people want to forget is that it is a class war that we're fighting. No victim is any greater of a victim than another. If you are a victim, you are a victim. If you were assaulted, you were assaulted. If your family was taken from you, they were taken from you. It's not more or less correct because of your skin color. One thing to pay close attention to. During the Civil War, the black folks in this country did not have a voice. They were not allowed to have a voice. That's the same thing that the disabled and homeless have to deal with to this day. The disabled don't get to group together the way that black people are allowed to. Also, many of us don't have the ability. There's a lot of protests going on about the things that happen to me and many others in the state of Colorado, and I can't even join that fight. I can't even go to the state of Colorado safely without being harmed. I can't go anywhere in America without having to deal with some repercussions from things that I didn't even do. Now, since we are on my Facebook, and we're going to read this post, it says, now mind you, this is extremely sexist. It says, men are boasting about growing a mustache for November. Meanwhile, they're sitting back and watching the government destroy this country and their children's future. How about you focus on growing a set of balls? Well, let's change the word men to women. Women are boasting about growing a mustache for November. Meanwhile, they're sitting back and watching the government destroy this country and their children's future. How about you focus on growing a set of balls? I only changed one word in that. Only one. But, of course, this is a joking matter because we're talking about growing a mustache. Most women cannot grow a mustache, but there are women who can. Now let's break it down. Men are boasting about growing a mustache for November. First of all, November isn't about growing a mustache for November. It's growing a mustache for men's rights, especially parental rights. As we all know, the court system here in America leaves a lot to be desired. And morality rarely ever enters into it. Now, it's not just growing mustaches for parental rights. There's also the fact that men are abused. The rates of male abuse and female abuse aren't that far apart. But who we blame is that far apart. Women are 11 times more likely to be stalkers than men, but men are more likely to get arrested for it. Women are more likely to get physically violent in a relationship, but men are more likely to be arrested for it. Men are committing suicide at 5 times the rate of girls. See, at the age of 15, girls start cutting on themselves at 5 times the rate of boys, and boys start committing suicide at 5 times the rate of girls. The reason for this is because of things like on this post. How about you focus on growing a set of balls? How about you man up? That's what boys are told. Their problems don't matter. Girls always have it worse, so we're just supposed to shut up about our abuse. If we do speak up about our abuse, we are abused even further by the opposite gender, as if we deserve to be victimized by women because we were raped or molested. That is not okay, but it's what we live with every single day. I get to hear about how white people are doing this and white people are doing that, and white people aren't doing anything to change it. White people, white people, white people, men, 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 men. Meanwhile, I've seen hundreds of white men at these protests, not fighting against black people, but speaking up for their rights, just like John Smith. This is important information. There's also John Brown to consider. You guys might want to ask about John Brown, and I'm typing his name up right now. John Brown's raid. Let's see. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry was an effort by abolitionist John Brown from October 16th to 18th, 1859. Well, apparently it ended on my birthday in 1859. To initiate a slave revolt in southern states by taking over the United States arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. It has been called the dress rehearsal for, or tragic prelude to, the Civil War. See, now black people are allowed to speak up. Back then they weren't allowed to. Now they are allowed to have a voice. Back then they were not allowed to. Over 600,000 Northerners were killed in the Civil War, fighting for slaves' rights to be free. Are those the white men that you're blaming for this? They were actually alive when slavery existed. Does slavery still exist today? Absolutely it does. Does it exist today in the United States? Absolutely it does. The 13th Amendment, the amendment that supposedly freed all the black slaves, was later used to round up all the black slaves that they possibly could get their hands on and shove them into chain gangs because, well, right after the Civil War, homelessness was made illegal in every southern state. It doesn't just get used against black people now, it gets used against anybody who is impoverished, anybody who is poor, anybody who is so poor that they're homeless. Now, there is a lot of help for women. There's a lot of very specific groups that will only help out black people. We got groups like that that are supposedly for white people, but they're all hate groups. And if they're not hate groups, they're not heard because it's assumed that they're hate groups because the members are white. Meanwhile, white people don't have special rights, and we get it shoved in our face about our white privilege. Well, what about black privilege? The privilege of having hundreds of men and women of different colors protect you, but you won't protect them. They're fighting for your rights, but you won't fight for theirs. You are expecting them to do these things for you, but you have no desire to do the same for them. Is every woman out there sexist like this? Is every black person out there racist like this? No. Just like not every male out there is sexist, just like every white person out there isn't racist. We're all different. Our skin color has very little to do with that, but very little is a far cry from none. See, let's say 60% of the black folks out there who get arrested want to claim that they were arrested because of their skin color. Now let's say that the actual number is closer to 5 to 10%. Well, 5 to 10% is still higher than 0%. That means that there are black people who are being arrested just because of their skin color. There are black people who are being pulled over just because of their skin color. But there's a lot that goes into it with that, like the ease of victimization. If the police think that you might have money for a real lawyer, they won't mess with you. In Boulder, Colorado, if they think that there's a possibility you might be a college student, especially an athlete, they won't mess with you. Boulder, Colorado is one of the best places to be if you're a black person in that particular situation. Now, if you've got dreads and work boots on and a hoodie, well, chances are pretty good they're not going to see them as work boots. They're going to see them as hiking boots, and you're a filthy hippie to them. So you're going to get treated like a homeless person. You're going to be targeted as if you were a homeless person. And homeless people don't have any of the special rights that black people have been given since the 50s. Now, don't get me wrong, most of these laws that give black people special rights are not observed to this day. That's why they keep passing the same laws every 10 years. Those laws are already on the books. There's still no way to enforce them, making it more illegal to do something that's already illegal, and there's no way to enforce it. It doesn't matter if it's illegal, it's not getting enforced. Now, many of the things that happen to, well, people of color, as it keeps being explained to me, have happened to me, including repeated police brutality, including officers putting their knee on the back of my neck, including a 300 plus pound uh, train, sorry, a 300 plus pound guard putting his knees on my back and forcing the air out of me. Now, that knee on the neck thing, as we all know, that has killed people. That has killed not just black people, but also white people. But nobody is making a big deal about it when it happens to white people. We're told that we all deserve it. I wonder how many of those women who stood up in that protest in front of all of those police officers to make a human shield, a human shield of white women protecting black people from getting shot by police. I wonder how many of them women were told that they're racist just because they're white. I wonder how many of those women have had to deal with the same things that they are protecting black people from: police brutality. How many of those white women have experience in that? Probably a few. One of the officers in Adams County, that's the county that Natalie Bollinger was killed in, he thought that he could get away with raping a woman who was considered mentally ill. That's because nobody listens to you when you're called mentally ill, and he thought that he was going to get away with it. Fortunately, the camera on his squad car was on, and it videotaped him raping this mentally ill woman. See, here's why the term mentally ill is worse than calling a black person the N word. You call a black person the N word, you're in trouble. You call a black person the N word in court, you're definitely in trouble. That's not a valid reason to deny somebody their human rights. But if you call somebody mentally ill, especially in court, you shut that person's voice down. They are no longer a human being to the courts. They no longer have the rights of an American citizen. And nobody's going to fight for them. If they do, it's only conceptually. See, in order to change these things, you have to get involved with the actual cases. Instead of talking about how bad it is, you need to actually help those people. I want to thank the literally millions of white people in this country who are fighting for black rights and for black equality. I want to thank you for that. It's a shame that you're not fighting for the homeless, because you could end up homeless. Any one of you could end up homeless at any point in time. Now, although you aren't going to get that chance of being harassed for the color of your skin, once you're homeless, you will get that harassment and worse. You will be 250 times more likely to be killed by police than if you were black. 250 times more likely. Then there's the fact that the general public just assumes that if you're homeless, that you're mentally ill, on drugs, and violent. Oh yeah, and must be a sex offender. Now, although none of these things are true, that's the bias that the American public is sold. Now, when we were sold this stuff about minorities, we got all sorts of people speaking up saying, hey, that's not right. That's not right. Not all Mexicans are thieves. Not all Jews are out to screw you out of your money. And not every black person is going to pull a fucking drive-by in your neighborhood. Not every Native American is an alcoholic. But when you're homeless, you get all of these bias and more. And every time it becomes a little bit more illegal for police officers to take their stuff out on minorities, it gets that much worse for the homeless because they're still going to take it out on whoever they can get away with. They've gotten the point that they can't get away with doing these things to blacks as easily as they used to, but they get away with doing it to the homeless and to the disabled a lot easier. I want to thank all of these white women who were standing up. Yes, I singled you out from the men. The reason for that is because there are a lot of women doing horrible things right now. And, well, it's nice to see women doing the right thing. It's nice to see women not doing the twisted, manipulative stuff that I have known many women in this country to do because they are taught to be that way. Just like this sexist post here. Men are boasting about growing a mustache for November. This person is literally blaming everything on men and going out of their way not to understand what the mustache is for or what November is even about. It's just a joke to this person. It says, meanwhile, they're sitting back and watching the government destroy this country and their children's future. So are women. But you know what? The men and the women who are fighting for BLM, who are not black, well, you're not sitting back just watching the government destroy this country and your children's future. It's not men. It's not women. It is individuals perpetrating these crimes. When it comes to a police department, you don't get to break it down to the individual anymore because law enforcement protects other law enforcement. They break the laws frequently, knowing that they're going to get away with it. Now, they're not likely to get away with it if they pull over somebody in a Maserati. But if they decide to roll up on somebody who lives in a bush, on a park bench, or behind a dumpster, somehow magically it's okay. And then here's the part down here. How about you focus on growing a set of balls? This is on Facebook. This is obvious sexism. Obvious sexism. Now there's another woman who, well, she's pretty badass. I'm gonna look it up. Roma Army. This lady sticks up for men's rights, just like John Brown stuck up for the rights of black people prior to the Civil War. He lost his life doing that. And then 600,000 white men from the North, in addition, lost their lives. Now, I noticed there have been a lot of people typing here. I'm going to try to go through this, but there's a lot. Mr. Gabapentin wrote, they discriminate on whites. Who owns the slave ships? Well, the first slave ships over here were actually owned by Queen Elizabeth I, or the Virgin Queen. Sir Francis Drake was well, Sir Francis Drake worked for the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, and that's not how slavery got started in the United States. That's how specifically the African slave trade to the United States started. And if you guys look back at Great Britain and you ask them how they feel about Queen Elizabeth I, most of them aren't taught about how, well, she started it. Meanwhile, she only did so to piss off the Catholics. Specifically, that's right, the Spanish. Y'all know what the Spanish Armada was. I will continue reading comments here. That one, this one typed, hi Sean. That one, this one typed, do you find you get less help being a white male in America? It sounds like they're very hostile towards them over there. Yes, very much so. There's a lot of hostility towards white males, even white males who are on your side. It's just assumed that because they're white males, they must be up to no good. They must be racist. They must be this. They must be that. They must be all sorts of things. Meanwhile, if you look at the way the laws are written, white males have less rights than anyone else in the country. We have less rights than immigrants. Now, a lot of people want to talk about how in the immigration courts, how immigrants in many cases aren't allowed an actual lawyer and they're not allowed to defend themselves. This is the same if you're homeless. You're not allowed an actual lawyer. You can't afford an actual lawyer. And a public pretender is not even going to pretend to defend you anymore. They don't have to. They're secure in their positions. They get paid whether they win or not. And because you're homeless, people want to tell you, oh, well, what they did to you is horrible. You should sue them. In order to sue them, you have to have a lawyer. If you can't afford a lawyer, you're screwed. And people say, well, there's all sorts of pro bono lawyers. No, there's not. In order to get a pro bono lawyer, you have to have other people speak up for you and fight for your rights. You cannot do it by yourself. You are 60% more likely to be incarcerated if you go into the courtroom by yourself. 60% more likely. That's pretty significant. Mr. Gabapentin wrote, yep, I can't get medical help. And that's the way it is with a lot of people in America. A lot of foreign folks don't realize how screwed up our medical system is here, or how much we pay and get nothing out of it. A lot of Americans are paying between $150 and $250 a month for their medical insurance. And then they've got anywhere between a $500 and a $5,000 deductible. So basically, let's say you break your arm, and breaking your arm is going to cost you $450 to get it fixed. You haven't had any medical issues for 5 years. In that 5 years, you've paid, let's go on the low side, you're paying $150 a month for your insurance for 5 years. And then when you break your arm and you need that $400 to get your cast put on and all that, they'll probably charge you more than that. But if it's not over $500, you still pay for it all out of pocket. Also, mental health care here, just like in Great Britain, is a big fucking joke. You got no idea how many people from Great Britain are ashamed of their medical services for the mentally disabled. I mean, there's a lot of other medical services there that they're proud of, but when it comes to mental health, yeah, it's pathetic, just like it is here. The treatment of the homeless is just as severe. Mr. Gabapentin wrote, the world is total authoritarian insanity right now, the slow transition into communism. No, that's definitely not communism. Communism, just like democracy, is a great idea on paper, but the hallmark of true democracy is an informed populace. If the populace is not well informed, if they are fed propaganda, which is what we live in today, they're not informed, they're not going to make good decisions for themselves or for their families or for those around them or for the rest of the country. Communism It's a great idea on paper. It's not much different conceptually from a democracy, but we don't live in a democracy. Our entire country is based on income. You have these rights under the Constitution, but if you don't have the money